ויאנוחו בשלום על משכבם ונאמר
Thank you all for coming tonight on Yom HaShoah. It's a very important Holocaust Memorial Day. As we know, it's said in the Jewish tradition and religion that as long as someone speaks your name, you're never truly forgotten. So we are going to be remembering tonight all of the millions of victims in the Holocaust, those who perished and those who survived and those who remember them. Thank you very much, Stephanie Koch, Kristen Whitaker, who I think is not here, Loriana Rosado for all of the work that she put into tonight, and of course, Dr. Lori Weintraub for always being the beacon of light at the Holocaust Center. The first thing I would like to do tonight is have our candle lighting ceremony to remember with each candle many of the groups that were particularly persecuted by the Nazis. And I'm going to have one of our wonderful students, Ruth Kupperberg, come and do that for us. So if you could come up, Ruth.
So for the Jewish victims of the Holocaust, I will bring up to light the candle Eva Rokshar. Next to light for the Roma victims, I'd like to bring up Ellen Kami. To light for the Slav victims, Linda Hirschfeld. For the political prisoners, could Marcia Hack come up and light the next candle? To light the next candle for the other religious minorities, Frank White. Next to light the candle for the disabled, Isabel Brucci and Rochelle Schwartz. And lastly, to light a candle for the homosexual victims, Marta Drizel.
Hi, my name is Isabel Brucci. I go to Port Richmond High School, and I drew the picture Hope Will Prevail. It's a picture of the hands of the fallen during the Holocaust reaching for the dove, the symbol of hope for the Jewish people. I was inspired to draw this picture after doing a study of the anatomy of human hands and taking an interest into Holocaust studies because I'm Jewish and it's part of my religion and my history.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Loriana Rosado, and I am the Graduate Assistant for the Holocaust Education and Programming Center here on campus, under the guidance of Professor Lori Weintraub. Our mission here at the center is to inform, inspire, and awaken future generations to the ramifications of anti-Semitism, prejudice, and racism, as well as the dynamism of Jewish culture and heritage. This is my first semester working in this department, and I've had the pleasure in building relationships within the community, especially with our local schools. Over the past couple of months, myself and our interns have had the privilege in working with students from John W. Lavelle Preparatory Charter School and New World Preparatory Charter School. There, we have introduced the students to one of our survivors that is as young as 96 years old, who lives here on Staten Island, Margot Capel. Out of the many events I have been fortunate to be a part of thus far, I am pleased to introduce the Holocaust Center's first annual Student Art Contest, Making Meaning for Memory, the Courage to Resist Hatred. Participants from several schools across New York City had the opportunity to share their creative response in art, poetry, photo collages, or prose, answering the following questions. What are the biggest lessons that you have learned from the atrocities of the Holocaust and other generations? How can these historic events empower young men and women today to resist prejudice, intolerance, and hate? In their various submissions, students referenced the testimony of survivors, resistors, and rescuers. All winning applicants were chosen based off the criteria of originality, creativity, passion, message, connection to theme, and symbolism. We received so many remarkable entries this year and look forward to expanding the contest to more schools in the upcoming years. And for our first place winner, we have Nathalie Kurowitza with her poem, The End of Destruction, from IS 72, 8th grade.
The beginning of the destruction of humanity. It starts within a small flame of hate, then turning into a wildfire of rage. You do this not because you are truly angry with someone, but because you believe someone must be blamed. Instead of you being punished, you turn to the innocent. You brainwash minds to collect as followers. Grown with an army, you start to hunt. The destruction of humanity has begun. Using the power you have gained, you take advantage. You have brought in the people you despise. They disgust you because of what they believe in, because of what they look like, because of their race, because of their status, because you simply can't find a good reason enough for your hatred. You torture and you punish, and now you resort to killing. Because the killing, the torture, the poison of your words towards innocent lives somehow makes you satisfied. If you think you can live with yourself without feeling remorse, you are wrong. Why waste your life ruining others? Be smarter than the devil standing on your shoulder. Don't be prejudiced or racist or segregate against others. Instead, welcome them into your hearts. Accept who they are and resist the urge to judge. Treat them the way you want to be treated. Stand up for the good, not the bad. The destruction of humanity will then come to an end. Don't repeat history. Instead, change the future.
Thank you for your beautiful poem. Now for our 9th to 12th grade category. First, with honorable mention, we have Marta Drizel from Susan E. Wagner High School.
Witnessing your family being murdered can be rough, but these brothers didn't let that stop them from being tough. Tuvia, Zeus, and Asa are the brave souls who didn't give up until they achieved all their goals. Hiding from the monsters was what they did, building a village completely off the grid. They lived in the forest and brought people there, hoping that God would listen to their prayer. The prayer that begged for this to end, and also that genocide wouldn't become a trend. It was tiring to live in constant fear. They were going to die soon, it was clear. But the Bielski brothers disagreed and said that hope and positivity is what they need. They were looked up to and were heroes to everyone who wanted to break through. Everyone wanted to beat the Nazis but were just too scared, but the brothers had a plan and were very prepared. The Bielski brothers will be remembered forever by beating the Nazis and being clever.
Now for our 3rd place winner, we have Isabel Bruschi from Port Richmond High School, 11th grade.
My picture, Hope Will Prevail, it represents the hands of those who were fallen during the Holocaust, reaching for the Jewish symbol of hope, which is the dove. And the meaning behind it, the parts of the hands, it shows the pain that they felt and how they were just reaching for God to save them. Thank you.
Now for our 2nd place winner, we have Claire Mitchell with her poem, Don't Let History Repeat Itself, from Staten Island Academy.
Don't let history repeat itself.
The atrocities of war aren't just written in lore. All over the world, people suffer each day. We must unite as one, so hear what I am about to say. We need to learn from the past. Yes, millions were actually gassed. It is a horror to even think about, but we must remember, without a doubt. These historic events should not be stuck in the pages of a book. We need to study them and take a closer look. Just yesterday, there was a deadly gas attack. 20 children were killed. The horrors are back. This heart-wrenching atrocity brought me to tears. It has rekindled a world filled with fears. Let us change the way we treat each other. We are all human. I am your sister, and you are my brother. We need to resist hatred, bigotry, and not judge. We need to stay strong and not budge. Do not let history repeat itself. Learn from the heroes, the survivors, and the books on the shelf. Be kind to all, teach tolerance and peace, so all of the prejudice and war will finally cease.
For our honorable mention, we had Samia Anjum from Lavelle Preparatory School.
This picture symbolizes that you should be an upstander, not a bystander. The butterflies represent the innocent people during the Holocaust, as butterflies do everyday things. The leopard symbolizes the Nazis who were ferocious and scary. Leopards can be ferocious and scary too. The two bees and hummingbirds show people being an upstander. Bees and hummingbirds are two kinds of animals that help the environment by spreading pollen from one plant to different areas so more plants can grow. The bee the bee that is away from the two bees and hummingbird represents a bystander because the bee is watching the commotion but not doing anything. In my opinion, standing up to problems that might not seem dangerous at first is essential because that problem might escalate to something really big.
We would like to say a thank you to all of the judges, the participating schools, the Hugh L. Carey Institute for co-sponsoring with us, and to all those students who entered the contest. We hope to see your involvement in next year's event, as well as broaden our school involvement overall. Thank you.
I'm very shortly going to be introducing our wonderful speaker. And since he's going to be speaking, speaking about letters, I thought it would be appropriate to just share a letter as we think about the continuing power of letters. And this was written to on behalf of one of the elementary school students after having a class visit with a survivor. This was arranged through the Holocaust Center, so I thought it would be a nice way of opening up our keynote speaker for tonight. And those of you who can't read it, it says, "Dear Brenda, thank you for sharing your story with us. I think you are so strong because you must have went through a lot. I could not imagine me and my family going through what you and yours went through. I'm so sorry about your brother and grandparents. You are so forgiving. I think if it was me, I would have had so much hate for the Germans. Once again, thank you for sharing your story with us. We appreciate you. Happy holidays to you and your family." Okay. Letters are fragile things. Although very few people actually write them now, preferring the clean and rapid communication of email, it was not so long ago that they were treasured forms of communication. You could hold them in your hands or fold them in your pocket. Sometimes they still smelled of the perfume of the writer, marked by the individual slant of their letters, written on their favorite stationery. They were personal and tangible and intimate. Despite their ephemeral quality, they could be saved, and they were. There is something about reading the handwritten letters of someone who is gone that stirs our memories and breaks our hearts. And if this is so, it is magnified immeasurably by reading the letters of someone who was murdered. Perhaps the act of preserving their letters, of saving them forever, is our best substitute for our impossible desire to save them, even when we know it is too late. In the case of letters written by Holocaust victims, they are not only works of art, evidence of love, but historical documents. They are proof of what people knew, or what they were kept from knowing, or what they refused to see. In these letters, people described their fears, their unwavering hopes, their anguish. In some cases, these letters, signed with their given names, are the last time they were allowed to think of themselves as human. There is much sadness in the letters which Dr. Cerf will share with us today. They show us shared sufferings, but also remind us how every Holocaust victim's story is unique, marked by particular and individual agonies. I am very happy today to welcome the deeply accomplished Dr. Stephen Cerf, Professor Emeritus of Bowdoin College, where he taught for many decades as professor of German. A beloved teacher and colleague, Dr. Cerf led a diverse and fascinating list of courses, including the emergence of the European encyclopedic novel, the Holocaust in the literary imagination, and turn-of-the-century Vienna, as well as numerous team-taught courses on opera, including the music dramas of Wagner, which I assume refers to Richard Wagner rather than what goes on in our music department. Among the seminars he has led have been Autobiography as Literature, Illness and Its Metaphors, and the Role of the Survivor and Survival in Western Literature. He has published on German writers, including Thomas Mann and Stefan Zweig. Dr. Cerf is also the author of many works and papers on opera and on musicians including Mahler, Beethoven, and Tchaikovsky, and has written many playbills and stage bills for musical and theatrical performances. Dr. Cerf is also a specialist in literature and pedagogy of the Holocaust. He has delivered papers and led workshops on teaching the Holocaust through cinema, and Anne Frank's short stories, A Mirror of the Diarist's Inner Self. He is a contributor to the Reference Guide to Holocaust Literature. His essay, 4 Genres and 1 Question, Why?, appeared in Shedding Light on the Darkness, A Guide to Teaching the Holocaust by Bergen Books, 2000. Last year, Dr. Cerf was awarded the Alumni Service Award for faculty and staff, presented each year for service and devotion to Bowdoin, its students and alumni. As his colleagues at Bowdoin noted, quote, Cerf shares freely his personal and family history in the classroom, always in the service of helping students in the Bowdoin community understand German language, culture, and the indelible legacy of the Holocaust, and more generally, to understand the power of literature, music, and art to express and reveal truths about humanity, end quote. Please welcome Dr. Cerf.
Thank you for your kind words, Dr. Laura Marwitz, and thank you here at Wagner College, the Wagner College community as a whole, for inviting me to speak to you today on this Holocaust and Heroism Remembrance Day of 2017. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the co-sponsors of this event, the Wagner College Chai Society, the Council of Jewish Organizations of Staten Island, and the Jewish Community Center of Staten Island. For me, the title of this talk is Hearing, Listening to My Grandparents' Voices. As you will see, I've heard their voices some 40 years ago for the first time during the 1978-79 academic year, but I have been listening to them ever since. From the middle of the 1980s on, ever since I began to give my course on imaginative writing and the Holocaust at Bowdoin, I had wanted to speak about my grandparents' letters to my mother, their daughter, and to my father, their son-in-law. I wanted to view the letters within their own context and not simply as a random batch of letters. My grandparents' 35 extant letters and postcards were written over a 2-year period from the autumn of 1939, the outset of World War II, until the autumn of 1941, roughly 5 months before my grandparents' deportation to the Ispitia death camp near Lublin on March 26, 1942. Not a single person survived that deportation from Nuremberg, Germany, their hometown, to far eastern Poland. Today's talk allows me to return to these letters for the first time since 2010 at Bowdoin for a common hour forum that allowed me to address this deeply personal topic for the first time. You see, their writing is their heirloom. They were murdered in the spring of 42, and I was born in New York City in the fall of 45. But I must add a significant fact now here at Wagner College. As a 71-year-old, from the earliest time on, I felt a linking affinity to my maternal and paternal grandparents. You see, my full name is Stephen Roy Cerf, and the middle name Roy is an amalgam of both the first names of my grandmother, Rosal, and my grandfather, Jonas. The naming of me of Roy, then, follows in the Jewish tradition of being named for significant ancestors who are no longer alive. In the Jewish tradition, by honoring their names, they're living on indelibly through their descendants. My mother must have sensed that these letters would contain her parents' last communications. Close to a year after she had fled Germany for Sweden in December of 1938, a few weeks after the Kristallnacht, together with her fiancé, my father, they were not yet married, she began to save these documents intuitively, sensing that they would become her parents' final testament. She had actually spoken last to her parents via telephone on February 5th, 1939, her wedding day. But as Jews, the older couple was prohibited from leaving the Third Reich, so they had to attend the wedding by telephone. Nazi Nuremberg to neutral Stockholm, geographically so close, politically so distant. My closeness to my deceased grandparents, as in the case of many a survivor child, was formed right from the start. The week I was born, in October 1945, my parents got the official word of the deaths of Rosal and Jonas Ulfelder. As often in Jewish families, children are named after the beloved deceased relatives. As such, my middle name was chosen by my folks, as previously mentioned, as an amalgam. It is not surprising that as a little boy from Queens, New York City, my favorite cowboy was Roy Rogers. And as a teenager, family friends likened me to my grandparents. My grandfather was a news junkie reading 5 newspapers every day, and my grandmother was an opera devotee. I too read 5 newspapers daily and I'm also addicted to opera. Nuremberg, may I remind you, was one of Hitler's most important 6 cities. He had 6 Führerstädte, 6 Führer cities. Why Nuremberg? It served as both the home of the yearly Reich Nazi Party rallies in the 1930s and as the home of the Nazi hate magazine, Hitler's favorite reading, Der Stürmer, or The Stormer, the Wild Attacker, published by the rabid Nazi hater Julius Streicher. It is from Nuremberg where the women will be transported or deported like soulless objects, because it is 1942 and because in the last 10 years of Germany's Third Reich, the Jews, along with other degenerate minorities, have been turned into non-human things. Just 2 months before the taking of this photograph by the anonymous eliminationist Nazi photographer at the Wannsee Conference of January 1942, the annihilation of Europe's entire 9 million Jewish population had been decided on. They have been objectified. The prideful existence of the picture itself speaks volumes, for it is the culmination of the yearly nationalistic Nuremberg official party day rallies of the 1930s, held to consolidate the one political party of hatred allowed in Nazi Germany. This city also gave its name to the Nuremberg racial laws, die Nürnberger Gesetze of 1935, that ripped away the citizenry status of these undesirable citizens. According to these laws, Jews and Gypsies could no longer enjoy the status of being legally protected citizens of the Third Reich. 2 things strike me about the picture you see: the dignity of these all too human and soulful women, and the fact that this photo is an official one, thus reflecting the pride of the Nazis in practicing genocide. We can hardly imagine the heartless soul of a camera person who took this picture of pending genocide. The enormity of the Nazi Holocaust, its vast scale, is its uniqueness, that such a cultured and well-educated nation as the Germany of the 20th century, the language group, the Central European countries that produced Marx and Freud and Einstein, that Germany could annihilate millions of fellow European citizens with such efficiency and with well-scheduled trains that you see before me, running from all over Europe to the death camps of Poland. That the Nazi Germans knowledgeably and openly followed an eliminationist politics on a continent-wide scale is their path-breaking, devolutionary contribution to human barbarism. In this photograph, taken at a transit camp just on the outskirts of Nuremberg, these human women have been waiting 2 days to board a train car for things, but as the trains were being run by the German government, they each had to pay a sum of 50 Reichsmarks for the transportation in an overcrowded cattle car and a 10-mark additional fee for food. This sum for relocation, a Nazi euphemism for murder. But the actual train car you see behind my grandmother is from a local Nuremberg train used to take the victims to their holding pen. At this transit camp, the Nazi functionaries were officially preparing the prisoners to be ready for travel. As the Nazis said, amtlich präpariert und reisefertig. Upon the victims' arrival at the transit camp, they had to surrender any valuable items they might have on them. And the guards, according to their own post-World War II court testimony, both got this confiscated gold, silver, and jewelry items as prizes to their bingo game in the evening at the transit camp prior to this, the second of what would be 3 Nazi deportations. And they also the guards viewed the Gestapo commissioned film of the roundup of the Nuremberg Jews for the first deportation to Riga, Latvia in November of 1941. I think it's important when we think of the 6 million dead to individualize them, to think of their own destiny, think of their own name, and their name gives their personhood, so that we know that Tilde Reichenmannsdorfer is standing next to Rosal Ulfelder, gives their name and gives their identity. The other fact is simple. The holding pen that we see here at the outskirts of Nuremberg was in the proximity of the Nuremberg Zoo. So the Nazi chose trains for objects and in an area for embarkation near to the wild animal zoo, both facts denying the humanity of their citizenless victims. In taking the shifting emotional temperature of my grandparents' letters, I will be leaning on the findings of Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, whose work with terminally ill patients she wrote in her 1993 path-breaking iconic book on death and dying. I use her work because the Holocaust, with its absolute eliminationist ends, was like a terminal illness for its victims. There was no way out. Hurt but death. In her study, Kubler-Ross takes note of the changing attitudes of her patients as they approach death. They travel from first denial, then to anger, then to bargaining and depression, and finally to acceptance. And in my grandparents' 2 years of letters, their shifting attitudes often parallel these findings. I would like to look with you at 2 excerpts from the first letters that my mother saved. They, with their themes of denial, would continue for the following half a year to come. How to explain their denial that my grandparents resisted in realizing that they were so late in the process of immigrating to America or to Palestine. From September 1939 on, Germany and the other Axis powers were at war and isolated from the foreign countries in North and South America, as well as from the British Mandate of Palestine. All places that my grandparents desperately were considering immigrating to. Denial as they were so late. Do not forget that in 1933, when the Nazis had come to power, the professionals, the people in medicine, in law, in education, were encouraged to leave the Third Reich because their licenses to work had been revoked. They were permitted only to practice their professions under severely constricted circumstances. Merchants like my grandfather could continue to ply their trade, selling tailoring materials to Jewish stores, and his business as a financial concern was not impacted. My grandparents' sense of denial unfortunately helped them to read the signals incorrectly. My grandfather was convinced that the Nazis would not harm him because he, like thousands of other honorably discharged Jewish war veterans from World War I, held a special protected position, and no harm would be inflicted. And sadly, what happened on the evening of the 9th of November, 1938, the Germany-wide Crystal Night that we've talked about before, during that night where over 300 synagogues in Germany were destroyed, set afire, demolished, unfortunately reaffirmed his faulty sense of rationalizing. When Nazi stormtroopers entered my grandparents' apartment in downtown Nuremberg, they saw all of my grandfather's honorably discharged papers from the Kaiser's army 20 years before, placed carefully in good order on the apartment's center dining room table. It was their commanding officer who said that my grandfather and his family would not be touched, although that evening thousands of other Jews across Germany were being rounded up. That my grandparents within the following months would have to move to an overcrowded Jewish house in the Jewish ghetto at an outlying part of town gave the lie to this SS man's statement. Because my grandparents had remained too long in Germany, their attempts to secure safe passage and to leave Nazi Germany in 1939, coded by their denial as a defense mechanism to achieving genuine poignancy throughout their letters. Please listen to this direct quote from his letter of February 6, 1940, sent to my parents in Sweden. Quote, "Just now an emerging new chance to get to Palestine might be a possibility, and via the Hopek line, Hopek, the Hamburg-America line. I will book passage tomorrow. I cannot foresee that this will work, but I will leave no stone unturned. One has to have relatives or friends who are already residing abroad to pay the down payment of $100 American per person telegraphed to Switzerland, and we have to have that to pay 600 marks to the Hapag. This trip would be tremendously dangerous. I actually believe that before we undertake this voyage, we, with our favorable immigration quota number, will be able to land in New York, and together with family members there, actually Chile offers no hope, and the same for Cuba. But don't you both be discouraged about it." End of quote. Jonah Ulfelder's hope placed in that favorable number for the U.S. visa was a denial of the ever so few Jewish immigrants the United States was actually accepting because of the profoundly anti-Semitic policies of the Department of State. The United States was loath to accept the release of tens of thousands of European Jews. As the American historian from the University of Massachusetts, David Wyman, has written, quote, "The policy of the United States was to obstruct rescue possibilities and to dampen the public pressure for governmental action," end of quote. The late writer-survivor Elie Wiesel has stated, quote, "Proud as we are of the generosity that America showed in fighting against Nazi Germany, we are embarrassed and dismayed by its behavior toward Hitler's Jewish victims," end of quote. If my grandfather vainly sought any kind of workable deal to get out, my grandmother's voice is decidedly complimentary. Her thoughts are primarily on the 3 generations of her family and on the life abroad that she and her husband could lead if they could flee. She's thinking domestic. She encourages my parents to write to her octogenarian father living with his family in the Bavarian town of Neumarkt. She's inquisitive of whether the quilted comforter she had sent to my mom in Stockholm is allowing her to sleep better. And she forever voices her frustrations about the little that they are hearing by mail from their other daughter in Tel Aviv. Germany being at war already with Great Britain, including Palestine. Those letters were a rarity. She is jubilant when she can locate an address of a family friend temporarily in Italy on her way to Palestine, to whom she can mail a letter eventually meant for her daughter there. She also speaks about the move to smaller, humbler quarters where the Nuremberg Jews will be housed, with 2 Jews to each room. In those days, you needed a sponsor to immigrate to the United States. Grandmother writes, this lady that you see in her picture, she writes, quote, "I have just written to your other mother in New York about when we will be together there. Together we can take in boarders and care for all of you at the same time. That will allow all of you to be earning your income at jobs outside the home, and we too can take care of the house. A mortal human being makes plans, but it is, dear God, who determines the way. Der Mensch denkt und Gott lenkt." This will turn out fine, she continues. Please continue to be healthy and continue to give us pride as in the past, and your mother kisses you much and very often. End of quote. My grandmother wanted her pragmatic domesticity to work. In fact, in 3 successive letters, some months later, she hatches the money-making plan to make artificial flowers for house decoration or for special ceremonial occasions, along with my dad's mother. And to this purpose, she confesses to having taken lessons in the making of artificial flowers. In her letter from the 22nd of September, she realizes that the materials for that enterprise might be costly, but wonders in her previous letter if the flowers could be made out of felt rather than dyed silk. What is haunting is the ever-increasing role played by the subtext of doubts and the all-too-human fear of failure in carrying out their plans for immigration. Underscoring these fears and complaints is my grandparents' sense of isolation. A world war is being waged. They had to move to the Jewish ghetto. Their daughters are in flight, and all of the Jews were forced to surrender their radios, the primary mode of mass media, months before. And the Nazis in their roles as common thieves or grifters must not be neglected. Quote, by 1938, as Peter Gay says, all Jewish fortunes above 5,000 marks had to be registered by Göring's office, and the Nazi officials had begun to draw up registers of Jewish property across Germany. Confiscation seemed only the matter of time. In my grandfather's case, his earlier voiced high hopes as far as reaching a speedy immigration number sound more realistic in a letter dated the 22nd of April, 1940. Quote, in regards to the Jewish Relief Agency, I will be in touch with them after Passover and be back to you when we find out the latest. You too can judge whether we are making progress with our number and come to immigrate soon or whether we have entered into a limbo status, or as he says, ein Warteland, that is, a German expression, Warteland, a bureaucratic country for just waiting. In his next letter from early June, my grandfather is counting again in vain on the Hamburg-America line, and this time to take them to Japan, where my parents had begun to live after gaining a visa and proper passage on the Trans-Siberian Railroad to Vladivostok, then to Seoul, and finally to Tokyo, where they spent 6 months in the middle of 1940 before arriving in the United States. It turns out, however, that the Hamburg-America line had suspended its operations at the outset of World War II, September 1939, and a majority of its boats were impounded in neutral ports. The depression and anger of my grandparents is not making any progress in their immigration attempts becomes palpable. But how do they voice this criticism? Each of their letters arrives in Stockholm, later in Tokyo, and still later in New York City, heavily glued with stern censorship rubber stampings, censorship numbers, and the ever-present vigilant and nefarious swastika. All these censored envelopes have their names affixed as the senders, Jonas Israel Ulfelder and Rosa Sarah Ulfelder. Jewish men and women were stripped of their individual names and became a collective tribe of non-personalized middle names of Israel's and Sarah's. Obviously, my grandparents could not verbally attack these Nazi racist policies in their letters because of this ever-present censorship. What they could do, and both did, and my grandmother's father did too, in his single complete letter in the correspondence, is to engage in what has been called horizontal hostility. They could voice their frustration and all-consuming anger, Kubler-Ross's second stage in facing death, as those relatives in America, at their own people, who probably could not have spared their money to book sea passage for them out of Europe in the first place. So that second stage, throughout that second period, in the end of 1940, beginning of 41, is directed at those American relatives who they had hoped would help them immigrate. And there are examples that are depressing and realistic as they feel left in the lurch in the second period and could only voice their outrage at their own relatives. Some form of self-hatred that the Nazis wanted to instill in their victims. The third stage that Kubler-Ross discusses, realizing that nothing will help, they fall into a depressive state of bargaining for longer stays of time. And so it went with my grandparents. Earlier passages of hope and that rosy view of future, such as my grandfather's letter of April 22nd of 1940, are no longer written. His happier early missive reads in part from April 40, quote, "We have received your postal card from Riga dated the 15th and your letter dated the 13th with the variety of affidavits and confirmation. Also, we received a small package and another from Raisi Tinlenberg with coffee, tea, and sausage. Again, heartfelt thanks, and our loving God will reward you and shower you with good fortune and blessing, and may usher you into prosperity, and perhaps bring us, in fact, together so that we spend our old age with you. No, the end of 1940, the beginning of 1941 shows their despair. And the pressure on my young parents themselves was enormous. They were in a new country with new language, with next to nothing in financial reserve, and these letters, particularly then in 1941, put a lot of pressure on them as such. The legacy of this pressure was felt in future decades, although my parents and I were gregarians supreme. We all are talkers. We were gregarians. We never spoke about this correspondence in my family in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, until this project. The finality of staying put in Fortress Europe, my grandparents signaled clearly with the writing out on their own handwriting of the newest paralyzing prohibitions on travel of Jews. In his letter of June 3rd, 1941, my grandfather copies verbatim the official edict, and this is written, quote, "As a reply to your query dated the 26th of May, we have to communicate to you that there is no possibility for non-Aryans to receive a Japanese transit visa." And in his second to the last letter, dated the 1st of November 1941, my grandfather gives up his hope of immigrating to the United States via Cuba because, quote, "persons under 60 years of age," he was in his late 50s, my grandmother on that picture was just about to turn 50, "are not permitted to immigrate." In his last letter, dated the 8th of November 1941, a month before Pearl Harbor, my grandfather casts his usually detail-filled request to the wind and, figuratively throwing up his arms, just appeals for help. Quote, "From our cousin Alfred, we have just received a postcard from Cholet in the south of France." Alfred was on the St. Louis, returned to Europe, and then perished in France with his wife and daughter. They received a letter from Cholet, France. They have, quote, "they have no possibility to immigrate. They too will have to adjust to their fate. Therefore, dearest ones, take care, try anything you can so that we may join you, perhaps via Switzerland or via Spain or via any place you can think of, and please leave no stone unturned. Please write to us soon again, and may you both have good luck." The fourth to the last letter, dated the 21st of September, 1941, my grandmother writes, quote, "I am thinking of my Liesel," that is her daughter in Palestine, "with the little sweetheart." She had just gotten a photo of her first grandchild. So I'm thinking of Liesel with her little sweetheart. The word she uses is Bobbele, from the word in German Puppe, or doll. She repeats Bobbele when she talks of her teenage youth, her teenage niece, Ilse, sending greetings to all, but first and foremost to Bobbele Ruth. In the next letter of the 13th of October, my grandmother states, "I am wishing Liesel and her husband the best and am sending a heartfelt kiss to my little Ruth from her grandmother." In her last letter, she ironically calls Ruth little and tiny because the baby, in fact, will allow the family to live on, and calls her unser einzige Freude, our sole joy. Now suddenly my grandmother has 4 generations of her family to concern herself with and is resigned to her own fate. In her third to last letter, dated September 21st, my grandmother speaks movingly about her paranormal communications with her older daughter, my mom. Quote, "At night, I always dream of you both. I'm talking with you, dear Kate, in my dreams. And when I wake up in the morning, I can have to realize that it is merely a dream, but I'm hoping that in this new year, this will turn into reality." As my grandfather states in June of 1941, quote, "Therefore, my most cherished dear ones, I am very often thinking of you and thanking you, and your ears will resound with gratitude. We always praise the two of you. As a consequence, my dears, we kiss you from the bottom of our hearts, your loving father." And my grandmother's deep-seated sense of unmediated religion comes through at the end of this correspondence, with its direct access to God in her final word in her letter. God is all enveloping for her, omniscient and trusting. Her words are rendered, quote, "My most fervent wish is unfortunately not going to become a reality, and we have to adjust to what dear God has desired. It is early on Friday evening after I have lit the Sabbath candles, and I am now casting my glance, looking abroad to you, my loved ones, and hoping that you both are as healthy as we are. We have not heard from you since early October, and therefore are not happy. Unfortunately, we have had no luck in our immigration plans. We must therefore have to wait to see what our fate has in store for us and how dear God leads us. I only have abiding trust in him. Ich habe nur festes Vertrauen zu ihm." The first letter in German word for him, ihm, was often capitalized by German Jews. But in this case, my grandmother chooses to capitalize all three letters, thus reflecting her own unbroken creed, her total belief in God. And you wonder, how did I get this 1907 postcard from my grandmother, Rosel Haas? And as a coda to the talk, I would like you to see this postcard. It's a 5 Pfennig. It has a 5 Pfennig stamp, and it's marked Sulzburg. It's a little hamlet of a town. This postcard was written by my grandmother in 1907, and she boldly signs her name in big letters, as you see, at the center of the left-hand half of the postcard, and again in smaller fashion in the line from the bottom of the postcard. I'm proudly showing the card because it was only recently retrieved 3 years ago, over 100 years after it was written, at a German flea market. It was received at a German flea market by a German Gentile friend of a cousin of mine, a survivor of the Riga ghetto, to remember those innocent victims of the Holocaust by name, by their personhood. It is our obligation as survivors, as survivor children, as survivor grandchildren. It's our obligation to retrieve their palpable past in examining the photographs in German magazines, and to identify our closest family, and to visit the flea markets in order to retrieve those personal objects that were a part of the victims' lives and have been unjustly relegated to uncommon places. It is our duty to remember. Thank you. First of all, I should mention that my father was in a concentration camp for 2 years, from 35 through 37. He sired a child with a Gentile woman. So that was against the Nuremberg laws. And the only reason he was sprung, he was interred in Chemnitz, Karl-Marx-Stadt, and now, thank God, Chemnitz again, in Sachsenburg concentration camp. And we had a very wealthy cousin who survived a Berlin financier who was my godfather, and he sprung him because he bribed the Saxony governor, the Saxon governor. I think they would plots with this lecture because my mother would be thrilled to see her mother's postcard as a teenager, and my father, I think, would deal with that because I've gotten to know my half-brother in Germany. Thank you.
I was so moved by this presentation. First the artwork, and then this wonderful reading of letters of Holocaust victims that the grandson has discovered all these years later, how meaningful and powerful they are as witness to the horror of the Holocaust. And I was so impressed with the number of students, particularly the diversity of students who presented the artwork as part of this larger meeting, because it shows that the Holocaust as an experience, as a historical fact, is not just simply an objectified thing. It lives now through other subordinated groups and other folks who are trying to find their voices towards freedom and to develop a society and a community and a set of values that nurtures one another rather than sets us apart. So a very meaningful event. I'm so pleased that you watched this tonight, and thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Teresa Reed, and I am a senior arts administration history minor at Wagner College in Staten Island. And this is a project that I worked on with Dr. Lori Weintraub, a history professor at Wagner, and it was part of my senior honors thesis. And I made a documentary on Professor Weintraub and Professor McCarthy's freshman learning community this past fall. They put on an original historical production based on Holocaust survivor testimonies. The students, 20 of them, studied 20 different survivors from the Staten Island area, and then they replicated those testimonies in a theatrical performance performed at Wagner for the Manhattan Day School.
I'm Dr. Laura Morowitz. I'm a professor of art history here at Wagner, and I've also been serving as the interim director of the Holocaust Center while our director, Dr. Weintraub, is on sabbatical. This was a really special program because it was Holocaust Memorial Day. And although we should remember the Holocaust always, this is a particular time to set aside some moments to really reflect on all of the various victims of the Holocaust. And we were very, very fortunate to have Dr. Stephen Cerf, Professor Emeritus of Bowdoin, come and speak to us on such a personal topic. It was so fascinating and heartbreaking to hear him tell his own story, the story of his parents, the story of his grandparents, and to single out some individuals from this tragedy and to restore their names and restore the humanity which had been stripped away from them. It was also really nice to start the program by having some students who participated in creative projects. Part of the whole purpose of Holocaust Memorial Day is to make sure that the younger generation, especially as time is moving on, don't forget to remember. And so to start the evening tonight by having some creative projects that the students did and put so much thought into was a really, really good way, I think, of remembering this sad occasion. So we were glad to see our students in the audience and also to see students ranging from grades 4 through 12 join us for this event. This particular program is really a reminder that we should never, ever forget and that we should always make it our responsibility and our duty to remember and to make sure that all those who come after us remember as well.